Okay. Let me just say thank you, Catalin, for that wonderful introduction. It makes me sound much more impressive than I really am. And with that, I'll go to the next slide. Oop. Okay. I propose to improve philosopher Noel Carroll's cognitive film theory concerning character allegiance by subjecting it to a critical race theoretical analysis. Carroll's theory already offers a solid general explanation of character allegiance for many, but not all movies and other moving images. However, it pays insufficient attention to both the role that disgust plays in generating solidarity, which is his idea, I'll explain in a moment, and the role that race plays in generating disgust. Next. More generally, I'll suggest that implicit bias and embodied affect figure into character allegiance much more seriously than Carroll's theory, as currently stated, can accommodate. These weaknesses also affect other related theories in both philosophy, or at least analytic philosophy of film, and cognitive film theory. Yet all these theories may be substantially improved through a critical race theoretical analysis. And I hope that the result will be a sketch of directions for revised versions of these theories that will better accommodate the concept of race and the emotions as well as the cognitions it generates. Next. So it'll be in 5 parts. I'll talk about Carroll's theory, then the concept of disgust. I'll briefly describe a survey I've done, and then discuss it. And then finally, I'll offer a brief conclusion. So next slide. Okay, so first, Carroll's theory. So next slide. Carroll's theory about character allegiance centers around the idea of solidarity. This concept aims to pinpoint how most spectators emotionally and cognitively engage with protagonists. Although it's not meant to be universal, Carroll's theory possesses considerable breadth as well as depth. It covers most noteworthy cases of character allegiance we might wish to analyze or explain, from classic Hollywood to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Next. However, there are 2 seriously underexplored dimensions to Carroll's theory. He pays insufficient attention to both the role that disgust plays in generating his idea of solidarity and the role that race plays in generating disgust. Next. While I do not question the general thrust of Carroll's theory, I want to bring attention to certain underexamined elements concerning how disgust plays a more frequent and substantial role in generating character engagement than his theory as currently stated can predict, and how many instances crucially use race in order to generate disgust. Next. For Carroll, solidarity involves a feeling of us versus them. And this is key. So he says, quote, "We're not only prompted emotionally to embrace the good people in a movie as members of a generic us. Their opponents belong to them," end quote. The latter are, quote, "usually presented as people we hate, indeed often love to hate," end quote. And he also says we feel antipathy, that is extreme dislike or aversion toward them. Next. Antagonists in moving images are presented as morally blemished with noxious traits and are generally repulsive. And these are all terms that Carroll uses specifically. And he says that such characters typically elicit audience responses of, quote, anger, indignation, hatred, and sometimes even moral disgust, end quote. Combining an earlier theory of sympathy for protagonists due to their morally positive traits with this concept of antipathy, Carroll then offers his definition of solidarity. Next. Quote, "The complex emotive relation of sympathy for the protagonists plus antipathy for the antagonists," end quote. Through this complex emotive relation, Carroll argues that, quote, "this is the psychological condition that most motion pictures strive to raise in audiences," end quote. It is viscerally felt, as he says, and that is to say, it is an embodied feeling, it is non-conscious, and not a high-level cognitive phenomenon. Next. So now I'll talk about the concept of disgust. Philosopher Daniel Kelly notes that cognitive scientists now typically describe disgust as a powerful reflex-like affective response that is triggered automatically, typically non-consciously, and with its standard responses clustered together. Another noteworthy trait that Kelly underscores is disgust's moral dumbfounding effect, following Jonathan Haidt and Schnall and a number of other psychologists. Next. So to talk about moral dumbfoundingness with regard to disgust, it means that assessments rooted in disgust can persist even when good reasons or evidence for them have been decisively refuted. Moreover, what Kelly does, he develops a theory to distinguish between core disgust and moral disgust by developing an evolutionary theory to explain how moral disgust arose as a clumsy, inelegant, piecemeal response from core disgust at bad food and poisons and so on and so forth. Next. This evolutionary development of moral disgust resulted from a need by early humans to clearly distinguish between in-group and out-group members. One result of Kelly's theory then is that it can explain how disgust can be easily racialized, that is, as disgust at out-group members on the part of an in-group. Next. Our reactions to social, cultural, and moral norm violations thus came to be modulated through the oversensitive, better safe than sorry, ultimately unreliable disgust response. So race therefore became a potential and sadly utilized demarcation for detecting in-group and out-group membership. Thus, Kelly's theory explains how racism can evolve and even arise from moral disgust. And Kelly's theory is something I'll use through the remainder of the presentation. Next. So thirdly, survey. So based on these ideas of antipathy and solidarity and racialized disgust, I performed an extended viewing survey of Westerns, colonial adventure films, war movies, Arab antagonist movies, and revenge films for possible instances of racialized disgust. I watched over 200 mostly Hollywood and European English language movies, both famous and forgotten. And I surveyed over 10,000 movies through secondary scholarship. So next. Just to give you an idea, I looked at 300, Apocalypse Now, A Fistful of Dollars, Casablanca, The Searchers, Red River, the World War II movie, Wake Island, and Sahara, Bengal Brigade, and Taken, and lots of others. Next. So I thought the survey showed that antipathy and solidarity were regularly and frequently elicited by forms of racialized disgust. And just to give you a couple quick examples, 300 depicts its antagonists, the Persians, as morally disgusting by characterizing them as decadent, effeminate, and darker in terms of skin tone than the film's ancient Greek protagonists. Apocalypse Now depicts its Vietnamese opponents as even more obsessed with brutal violence than its American soldier protagonists. Next. And it also depicts its Vietnamese antagonists as morally disgusting in other ways and often racially denigrates them through various racial slurs. A Fistful of Dollars, the spaghetti Western, depicts its antagonists as morally disgusting by making them gun runners and sellers of whiskey to Native Americans, and therefore as betrayers of whiteness, and as the film literally says, as scum. And therefore they turn out to be far worse than the white anti-hero antagonist played by Clint Eastwood. The Searchers operates by depicting its Native American antagonists as morally disgusting, by characterizing them as even more warlike and savage and brutish than its white protagonists. And these traits are, of course, presumed to be due to their race, due to their being, quote, savage, end quote. And Red River operates in the same way with regard to its Native American secondary characters. Next. Wake Island characterizes its Japanese antagonists as unfair, devious, violent, and gleeful at killing the film's white American protagonists. Bengal Brigade characterizes its South American antagonists as disgustingly violent and devious and not honorable, in contrast to its noble, brave, and fair white British protagonists. And Taken characterizes nearly all of its antagonists as either Slavic or Arabic, that is to say, as lesser forms of whiteness or as perhaps non-white, and disgustingly violent, mean to young white women, and or disgusting and with disgusting social habits. And this is in contrast with its fully white protagonist, who's far more sympathetic. Now, no, that's okay, Kathleen, you can go to the next slide. Now, an interesting recent case you may have seen is the BBC Amazon Prime miniseries, The English, which uses disgust to distinguish its chief antagonist, who is a syphilitic rapist, who's nonetheless white, but that feeling elicited strengthens our solidarity with its Native American and white female protagonists. And I mentioned this in order that we can discuss it later. So next. So fourth, discuss the discussion of these things. So one reason for frequent and substantial uses of disgust in moving images is to swiftly generate aversion for antagonists and solidarity with protagonists through clear visual or oral means: missing teeth, sloven or unshaven appearances, speaking untranslated languages, having disgusting eating or social habits, wearing clothing that offends standard mainstream Western social sensibilities, often weird or dirty or non-Western, lacking individuality or being characterized as mindless violent groups or thugs, speedily confirm such characters as appalling or repulsive. Next. In a sense, these character traits are merely elements of what Carroll calls criterial prefocusing. That is, cinematic means to narrow viewer attention at what viewers should focus on the most and what matters most in a cinematic story. So in terms of emotional responses, these are the things that filmmakers want viewers to have in terms of emotions, but also in terms of what they want viewers to perceive. So with regard to solidarity, these traits, these racialized traits that I'm arguing are evident in lots of films, mean that viewers focus narrowly on the badness of antagonists and on the goodness of the protagonists in reaction. Next. However, race in the guise of ethnic foreignness or racial otherness often functions as a boon in generating solidarity, especially for many white American audiences and those in white dominated cultures, where xenophobia and antagonism toward former enemies, subjects, or opponents remain strong and are frequently tinged with racism or racialized ethnic prejudice, albeit now typically in the form of implicit biases. But nonetheless, what that means is race and ethnicity typically place such characters virtually automatically in the category of them for these viewers. Next. As examples from the 5 film genres survey attest, disgust plays a surprisingly prominent role in creating antipathy and solidarity, and race is a crucial, standard, and seriously underestimated factor in generating those sentiments. Furthermore, because disgust elicits a quicker, more unitary reaction. That is, as an autonomic affect ordinarily triggered non-consciously as a unified cluster of responses, it may be invoked more immediately and intensely than other emotions mentioned by Carroll, which often require cogitation for their full effect. Next. More broadly, the survey sketched above shows that the good guy, bad guy axis and the us versus them attitude at the root of solidarity and much character allegiance is not only political, as Carroll notes, but also lends itself all too readily to being played out through racialized characterizations that trigger various forms of racialized disgust. Next. Such repulsion at antagonists commonly and quickly generates added cohesion with protagonists in a way that Carroll acknowledges but underestimates in his theory. And its instances seem to be on a par with and may even outnumber those generated by antipathy elicited through more cognitive emotions like anger, indignation, or hatred. Next. In addition, the structure of solidarity strongly implies that many, perhaps most cinematic audiences or audience reactions occur at automatized non-conscious levels, thereby making disgust a quicker, more compelling, and intense response, especially given its overpowering, morally dumbfounding nature. And it also implies that disgust may even underlay many reactions stemming from anger, indignation, or hatred, which are Carroll's preferred emotional responses. Next. So, conclusion. The results in the foregoing analysis might be put in the following way. The good news is that Carroll's general theoretical model possesses even more breadth and depth than he had argued. The bad news is that, as stated, it seriously underplays the role of disgust and race. A frequent and significant amount of solidarity seems to be, and I think is, racially motivated and due to disgust, more precisely to forms of white supremacist racialized disgust. Next. Thus, one helpful way to reconceptualize such phenomena in film and moving images in general would be through the lens of implicit bias and embodied affect, such as through disgust. So that is to say, through non-conscious automatized affective responses that do not involve higher level cognition and can be triggered by race, sex, gender, disability, and so on. So with some adjustments, Carroll's theory of solidarity could be helpfully employed to explain disgust as well as race's many uses on behalf of white supremacy, and perhaps could be extended to other forms of racism as well. Next. Carroll's theory, of course, is only a general explanation of concerning how audience members form allegiances with cinematic characters. It's not meant to be a universal theory, and so some exceptions are to be expected. Still, it explains a vast number of cases, especially ones that might seem important to us, like the ones I surveyed here from mainstream Western cinema. Next. Admittedly, Carroll acknowledges that racism poses challenges that should be addressed, and he does so in various places. But my argument is that more is needed. There's further theorization and research programs that are required in philosophy and aesthetics, psychology, film studies, history, and so on. In our research, we should aim to show in greater depth and accuracy how race and disgust affect sympathy, antipathy, solidarity, character engagement, and related concepts. Thank you. And so there's this is available also from the journal Film and Philosophy in a forthcoming article. And if your university subscribes to the journal, you can get it for free. Thank you.